Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. In today's episode, we will be discussing episode number 6 of season 6, which is the episode right before this mid-season break of Better Call Saul, called Axe and Grind. I don't know if you noticed, Sona, but did you notice these titles so far have all been with an and in it? So this is Axe and Grind. Last week was Black and Blue. The episode where Nacho died was Rock and a Hard Place.
Interesting. I usually do pay attention to the titles, and for whatever reason, I haven't been this time.
And then there was the one before that was Carrot and Stick. Remember where they were like, enough carrot.
I do remember that one, and I didn't question it because that is kind of a phrase, right? Carrot and stick. But the others are definitely being forced into that convention. Well, not Black and Blue, but Axe and Grind would be.
Yeah, Axe and Grind is very much a stretch. Plan and execution for next week. There you go, Sue.
Okay.
Which, of course, is D-Day. We'll get into all that. So just a reminder to everybody, make sure you subscribe so you know when these updates are available. Later this week, I'll be continuing to cover Barry. I was not 100% on board, by the way. This is just a general announcement for everybody. Not 100% on board with Barry. Had been gone for so long, and maybe I just wasn't in the right mood of it. And I've been covering it since the beginning of this season, so I was kind of giving it strong reviews, but I wasn't really feeling it. But I got to say, the last 2 weeks have been so exceptional on that show. You really see this show is like kind of working at a completely different level. So, Sona, just for you, it's something to
I gotta watch it. I
mean, just something to watch casually because it's half an hour per episode. But man, that last week, kind of the opposite, by the way, of what we're going to talk about today with Better Call Saul. Last week, they put out all these things out there, like literally 3 or 4 different threads. And I'm like, wow, all this stuff is going to pay off. And it paid off 1 week later. I was like, holy cow.
Wow.
This show is on a breakneck pace because it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, for a 30-minute show, that's amazing.
The show is incredibly disturbing and very funny at the same time, which is a very strange combination. Like you are like, wow, these people are so damaged and this is such a dangerous situation. And then you're laughing hysterically 5 minutes later. It's a very strange concoction, but I highly recommend it. So we'll be breaking that down later this week. And also, I will be reviewing Alex Garland's new movie, Men. I'm a big fan of Alex Garland. He made Ex Machina and Annihilation a few years ago. And he also wrote the scripts for Danny Boyle's movies, 28 Days Later, and Sunshine and The Beach, which people hate. But the book, he wrote the novel that it was based on, which is very good, actually. Anyway, he's a very interesting guy, always thinking very, very big thoughts. And I'm very interested in this movie because unlike his previous films, this one's been getting very mixed reviews. And apparently it has one of the most messed up endings of like all time. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And I'll have my review later this week. Also, Sona and I will probably try to find something to talk about. I'm sure there'll be something to talk about. But in the meantime, before Saul comes back, we will be getting back together at the end of June, definitely, to cover Only Murders in the Building. So anybody out there, check out our coverage of the first season of Only Murders in the Building. Very entertaining first season of that show. And those recaps are out there. So if you are just catching up on the show, make sure you do catch up before June 28th. Also, we'll be covering the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, something that Sona has absolutely no interest in.
Zero.
So we will be covering that Obi-Wan Kenobi show, which fits perfectly into that 1 month slot because it's 6 episodes, 2 episodes on week 1. So in 4 or 5 weeks, the whole thing gets knocked out, and we will be covering that in the meantime. Okay, so that's all to come. Just keeping you all posted, and lots of summer movies that I'll probably be reviewing along the way. I definitely want to see Jordan Peele's new film, Nope, and probably covering the new Top Gun movie. And there's just so many things. It's the summer, so there's lots of things to cover, and hopefully Sona will be around for some of those as well.
Wow, that sounded so foreboding in a way. Okay. Yes, I hope I survive the summer.
Hopefully she makes it to our next series. It's only a month, so to hang in there.
Gosh, you know something I don't know? I feel fine.
Okay, so let's get into the episode. So Axe and Grind, like I mentioned, a little weird, like you said, kind of a stretch for the title this week. And we open in a flashback. This is something that I kind of expected that we would be seeing more of. We see Kimmy, by the way, my wife's nickname also Kimmy when she was younger. So more creepy parallels. You got the blonde ponytail. You got the Kimmy nickname. So we do open up with Kim, little Kim, apparently has been caught stealing.
Right.
And her mom shows up, and there's a pretty interesting sequence here where the mom kind of scolds her. it just makes it sound like she doesn't have any money to pay, which may be true, actually. And the shop owner eventually, kind of after this scolding, lets them go. And then interestingly, when they walk out the door, the mother kind of laughs about the whole thing. So she's not upset about it at all. And then even has stolen some earrings herself.
Okay, first of all, who is the actress playing Kim's mom?
I don't know her. I think we've only seen her on the show as only one other flashback, I think, right? If that's correct, if I remember correctly.
My husband and I were having an argument for the first 5 minutes of this episode of whether this actress was Rhea Seehorn or not.
Oh, I'm pretty sure it's not. No.
That's what my husband said as well. But I felt like the characteristics between the two were so similar. If this was not Rhea Seehorn in makeup or whatever, she's done an excellent job at paralleling grown-up Kim. I feel like the voice was the same, the mannerisms were the same, all very well cast. Where in contrast, I was a little distracted by the casting of the girl, who I think was a fine actress, but just to me, like, had no resemblance to the adult that Kim becomes. But I think it's very interesting in laying the groundwork for why Kim is the way she is, how she became this person. Sometimes kids do things like this because they truly don't know the difference between right and wrong. Sometimes they do things for attention.
I found it a little interesting backstory because, first of all, she's teaching her this lesson that it's okay to do bad things as long as you get away with it. And also, I guess, we wonder about her affection. This is adult Kim's affection for Saul. Like many people, right? It's this echo of some kind of childhood relationship. So that seems to be the mother.
Okay, so the actress is Beth Hoyt.
Yes, I looked her up also. I looked it up. I did as well.
So definitely not Rhea Seehorn, but excellent job in my mind with paralleling who Rhea Seehorn plays on the show. So many parallels. So I was very impressed with that.
It's maybe a little bit of the frustration I have with this episode. And I feel like this across this almost entire episode, in that I appreciated the scene. I thought it was very well done. And yet I feel like I don't really learn anything here that I hadn't kind of guessed on my own. Right. So
agree.
She obviously has this kind of, toxic relationship with her mother. That is probably part of the attraction to Saul. She's trying to be close to that maternal figure and fix that person as well, right? And which, of course, happens many, many times. It's very true to life. I'm not denying that. But at the same time, I'm like, I could have basically guessed this backstory without any scenes of it. So I'm not sure how much it adds to anything.
While I do agree with everything you're saying, one thing that I felt after watching this episode, which I felt before, I think Saul is set up to be this shady guy, slipping Jimmy, and all of this. But I wonder how much of it is really, he's just so much more influenced by other people than he needs to be or should be.
Yeah, I think that's something we touched on earlier, but I 100% agree. That's kind of become more and more apparent as time's gone by.
Yeah.
That, for example, Jimmy is probably okay living and working at a Cinnabon right now because that's his options. But it's like throughout his whole entire life, he's always been reacting in a positive way to someone saying like, you can't have that. And he says, oh, well, if I work really hard, I can actually be a lawyer. And he did it.
Mm-hmm.
And in a negative way, also someone saying like, for example, you can't be a lawyer. That's beyond your status. So he's like, okay, well, then I'll do it in spite of that as well.
Right.
Very childish, by the way. Like I kind of mentioned that in an earlier episode of our recaps, have like some ways he has a very juvenile perspective on life, not only a little naive in some ways that, the bad guys are bad, the good guys are good. So it's this very simple moralistic point of view of the world, but also like a child or like a teenager, you need to almost manipulate him with reverse psychology, right? And that's what he always seems to be reacting to something, right? It's like a slight that he feels. I mean, look at his overreaction to Howard, who was a jerk, mostly because Howard was doing what Chuck wanted Howard to do. Howard at one point basically did look down his nose at Saul, but once Jimmy / Saul did some good legal work, Howard's just like, hey, he can work for us. He's pretty good, right? Like he was already ready to make that pivot. And then, Chuck didn't want it. So he sided with Chuck because, of course, Chuck was where he was more loyal. And then, but then later on, he really does try to patch things up with Jimmy. And Jimmy's reaction to that is he can't accept the fact that, sometimes people are jerks to you and eventually you can partner up with them. Jimmy's just like 100% one thing or the other. Howard was a jerk to me once. Howard is a jerk, and I'm going to throw bowling balls at his car. Like that's it. Like there's no repairing that relationship. As a matter of fact, he's going to double down on permanently damaging that relationship with Howard.
I think we're coming at it from different angles, because what I'm seeing between him and Kim is, I think there was always the impression of, oh, poor sweet Kim would have led this nice normal life as a lawyer had it not been for Jimmy.
Yes.
But actually what we're seeing is that maybe Jimmy would have led a nice normal life as a lawyer, brother issues aside, which were always going to be there. But, it's Kim that keeps pulling him into like, well, what should we do about this sandpiper thing? Maybe it's not all done. Maybe there is more that we can do.
I think I misunderstood. That's where you were trying to go with that analogy. Yeah. I completely agree with everything you're saying. And as a matter of fact, I would only restate it slightly in the fact that they have in some ways been good and bad for each other, because there is an alternate version of this history where Kim may always in the back of her mind have been that bad girl, but had just had a regular traditional career as a lawyer with this kind of unsated part of her personality. If she had not met.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then vice versa. There's a version where Jimmy, without her potential influence, with someone who facilitates, who is kind of like on the in, but allows him to slide between the criminal and the legitimate world. And then, of course, without the toxic relationship with Chuck, that he might have basically been one of those, I reformed myself. And that's kind of maybe the interesting thing that the show is developing.
It's like they're two addicts, right?
Yes, yes.
That,
perfect.
Maybe you would have tried some drugs recreationally and then just gone back to your 9 to 5, but you met the person who also was super into trying out things. And now you're just spiraling together.
Exactly.
It has that feeling to it.
Yeah, it's like she's an alcoholic who has an alcoholic, to go back to something you mentioned in the last episode, it's as if she's an alcoholic and she had an alcoholic mom, and she may be a potential alcoholic, but she's never drank before. She's kind of been on her best behavior. And now she's dating an alcoholic and she's trying to fix them and maybe seduced by this lifestyle as well. So it's kind of a double-edged sword for both of them, really. So the next thing we see is Howard is this very interesting. He has a very fastidious morning routine. He seems to be a very fastidious guy. So I thought this was very interesting to see him in his house. I don't think we've kind of seen this side of his personality before. But more interestingly, I don't know if this is going to pay off in the future. We see something that's been hinted at when he was at his psychiatrist's office earlier, or psychologist, I guess, earlier in the season, where his wife has a very, very chilly relationship with his wife.
She was not even moved by his latte art.
Yes, I found it very interesting. I love that scene, by the way. This episode directed by Gus Fring himself, by Giancarlo Esposito.
Oh, I missed that.
By the way, do you, I could cut this out of the episode, but do you see any resemblance between Giancarlo Esposito and your husband?
We hear it all the time.
Okay, I thought so.
And it's kind of become a joke in that my husband has heard that he resembles a lot of people that he does not in any way resemble. But every now and then, and there are a lot of conversations you can have about race and people of color and who looks like who, depending on the race of the person who's looking at them, and all of that. But every now and then someone says something that seems a little bit closer to true. Mm-hmm. And I will say, while I did not see this years ago, I feel like as my husband is getting older, I am seeing the resemblance more. I have not broken it to my husband that I think he is aging into a Gus Fring type of look. But I do think that there could be something to that. Yes.
Well, and this is the thing, the exact thing you're touching on, which is that, I've probably never mentioned it to you before, but like when Giancarlo Esposito was in those Spike Lee movies, I met your husband, shortly thereafter when they were young, because they're approximately the same age, I think. I was like, oh, there's some similarities there, but only occasionally, Mm-hmm. And the reason I bring it up now is because it's like, it seems that now, like as your husband has aged, I'm like, it used to be like maybe 10% of the time. I'm like, oh yeah, he reminds me of Giancarlo Esposito. Now it's like 30% of the time,
maybe. Yeah. I mean, I get it. Let's say I get it.
I thought another interesting thing about that the way that this is directed, that, how cold things are between him and his wife. And we don't know what the root of that is, but it seems like they don't sleep. She doesn't know where he's sleeping. So, they have this massive house. They're probably not sleeping anywhere near each other. But I love the detail, like you mentioned, that he does go and make that whole cappuccino, I guess, right? He makes that whole coffee for her in the morning, very artisanal, and puts his namaste, his peace symbol on there. He's like, using his whatever.
Very impressive.
Yes, very impressive. Which, of course, she then dumps directly into a travel cup.
I feel like those types of cups have become very popular just in the last 5 years.
True. That could be a detail, a glitch in there.
Yeah, but I will say one thing that I have going on in my house is that when my husband makes me a cup of coffee, I always have said to him, it's like a little cup of love, because it's like an act of love. Like, he's very purposeful in how he makes it. It will be like layered with different colors. There'll be cinnamon sugar on top.
Oh, wow.
It's very special to me that he takes the time to make that coffee for me. And I feel like it was reminding me of that idea that, Howard is very carefully, purposefully making this coffee for his wife, that she doesn't just dumps in a travel cup.
Exactly. You think about the amount of time it shows you him prepping it.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
I don't think she even noticed the design on top. And,
right.
And like, once again, very clever camera choice. Like, you see his reaction. First of all, you see her walk away from the coffee, and there's this moment on his face where it's as if he thinks, like, is she going to not even drink it? And I was thinking the same thing, like, wow, what a slap in the face. And then she goes and just pours into the travel cup, which is better, but he's still pretty wounded by this.
Yeah.
And of course, the entire conversation about whether they're going to that meeting together or not. And like, should I go? Should you go? Hey, we can go together. And she's just like, nah, you go.
No.
So once again, not picking up on any of the clues. But
and then he just walks right out the door.
Exactly. But it seems very cordial. So I wonder if this is just a marriage that's gone very cold, or whether there is some damage he's done. So maybe he cheated on her or something. There might be more to this story that we don't know.
Right. True.
Then we see Howard meeting with his PI. And this is very interesting. I think we should talk about this, because the PI shows that Jimmy has a very, very, very set routine, which I wouldn't think would be the case. And there's only one digression in his entire schedule, only one day, one thing, which was he went and took about $20,000 in cash. It's as if they know the PI is following him. Do you think that they're that on top of these things? Like, they would know that?
That Jimmy knows the guy's following him?
Correct.
For some reason, I assumed he did not know, but I could be wrong. Then
we see the thing that I wanted to maybe circle back to on the correlation between these, Jimmy and Kim, and, the whole conversation you were just having about what could have been their alternate life paths. Mm-hmm. We see him with the vet that they've used multiple times whenever they're in a pickle and they need medical attention. You need to maybe explain some things here to me if you can. And, but there's a lot of interesting things that are on their face. First of all, we see.
Well, I think you might be giving me too much credit, but let's go. Sure.
This very sweet pooch. I felt so bad for this little dog, Fernando, but he's going to be okay. He's going to be
all
right. What's interesting here, though, is that the vet basically says he loves helping these animals and he is out of the game. He's just, he's just saving up a little more money and he's ready to sell his little black book.
Mm-hmm.
And two things about the little black book. One is, do you think that Saul buys this little black book at some point in the future? And most importantly, there's a card in there. Best quality vacuums, very important for Better Call Saul and for Breaking Bad as well.
Yes. The guy who will disappear you.
And great working here by Rhea Seehorn when Kim is looking at the board with all the animals on it, because Jimmy's like, I can't believe he's going to walk away from all this. He must be making so much money under the table here. And Kim goes, you know what? Sometimes when you know what you want, and I think she's speaking to, the fact that she loves doing this pro bono work. It's interesting because you're seeing two different paths diverging here, right? First is you see this vet who's done the Better Call Saul thing, right? He's become the doctor to the mobs, basically, or to the cartel.
Right.
And you have Kim, who's like looking at the other side of this guy, who's saying, like, I now am going to dedicate myself to saving these animals, which is what I love. And you see basically two sides of the coin right here at this very moment. It's kind of all packed into this one scene.
I thought it was interesting when Jimmy asked to see the book. First, I thought it was a nervy thing to ask, but in my life, I always say that if you don't ask, you don't get. So I don't blame him for asking. But then I was surprised that the guy was actually going to show him the book, because who knows how much you can absorb from that by just flipping through it, but certainly something. And then when you see the whole book is coded, right. And he makes the joke, oh, we found the Unabomber or whatever it
the
was.
Zodiac Killer.
Oh, the Zodiac Killer, yes. Either works.
Exactly.
I don't know if you're expecting me to solve the mystery of what exactly is substantively going on medically here, but I don't know the answer.
That was the question. I might have to ask my wife, actually. She's one episode behind. I think she just finally yesterday caught up on last week's episode.
For a minute, I thought he was going to try and fake a heart attack of some sort, because they were talking about the heart rate. And I was like, wow, that is on the nose with what really happens. Right?
I thought the same thing. Like, oh my God, here we go again. Another more hints at a heart attack.
And then it looked like his pupil had been dilated.
Yes.
A massive amount. And then I didn't understand how that went with the cardiac issue. So yes, maybe this is something your wife needs to weigh in on.
Yes. And he also said that, you might feel a little trippy, but it's not like he's going to be like extremely high. It's just going to give him like heart palpitations and make him feel a little fuzzy headed, but that's the extent of it.
Like 2 Red Bulls on an empty stomach.
Right. And, so I think I have a theory here, but we'll save that for later. Then we see Kim in the courtroom. She has apparently spent between 30 and 50 hours, depending on the estimates here, between Cliff's estimate and hers, on preparing this defense. So
I love this scene for the reason that, as we've talked about before, such an accurate depiction of what goes on in actually being a lawyer, and the different types of law that she's practicing compared to what Howard's doing. My husband and I had a conversation about how Howard, when he's making the coffee and everything else, like, he doesn't seem to be in a big hurry to get out the door. Like, he's rushing to court, which often as a lawyer, you find yourself being like, I got to get out of here. Otherwise I'm going to miss my calendar call. And the care he's taking in making his latte. And then you see Kim just pushing her button and getting that crappy coffee that comes out of the machine. Yes, great parallel. As a pro bono lawyer, right? The contrast in the different cups of coffee that they're having. And then I did, in the scene where she is doing the cross-examination, and she's talking about how statistically it's so unlikely that anyone would be stopped for this type of violation. And she stopped and she counted all the air fresheners and the cars in the parking lot. And this police officer has only stopped someone for this type of infraction X number of times. As we're watching this, we're saying, oh my gosh, it must have taken forever for her to go through all those records. So to follow it up with the concrete conversation that a lot of shows would not do, I think they would just be like, hey, she's a great lawyer. She does this type of stuff. Okay, how long did it take you to go through all of those papers to figure all of that out? And what does that mean as far as the money that you're working for? Yeah, it comes out to minimum wage. So, exactly. I loved all of that from a nitty gritty law perspective. It was very realistic, I thought. And then, of course, Cliff gives her a dream offer. It's not a guaranteed job. It's really just an interview, or not even an interview, an introduction. But it's for, what's the name of this? This is a real thing, right? This. Yeah, I assumed it was not, but. Okay. So I'll just leave it that way. So. But I did think for a minute, the foundation's located in New York, right? Yes, it's an East Coast, right. And then they're opening a chapter out in Albuquerque. Maybe Kim just goes to New York, and that's why we never see her. Exactly. I don't know. I'm trying to find a happy ending for Kim. But I mean, I literally put in my notes, I'm like, oh, Kim goes straight, exclamation points. I'm like, that's why, right? Like, I could totally imagine she aces, at this moment in the episode, I'm thinking she aces this interview. She's so passionate about it. She gets the position. And like you said, she, maybe it is on the West Coast, maybe it is on the East Coast, little by little, she has to commit herself to that, and they drift apart, right? To a lesser extent, there was that time when Kim went off on her own and had that big client where her and Jimmy were drifting apart. I guess that was season 4. And, I could totally imagine, she starts doing something she's really passionate about. It's 50-hour weeks for these clients or more, and she's traveling, and, Jimmy just fades away. It happens all the time. That's what I was thinking at this moment, but we will get to the end of the episode. Right. Sure. Yes. Same. And then another great Kim scene here is when she goes to, excitedly wants to go talk to Jimmy about this. And she meets Francesca, who's now back on board officially as
their secretary as Saul's secretary. Francesca's so happy to see Kim. That's part of the reason she accepted this in the first place. She's done a great job of starting to decorate the place.
Mm-hmm.
And she's so happy to see Kim. She's so excited. Very interestingly here, I think the most interesting part of this episode is where she goes, I'm so happy to hear that you guys got married. And do you have a registry anywhere? And Rhea Seehorn's performance here is so great because it's as if she, once again, doesn't have family. She doesn't have these kind of traditional friendships. She really only has Saul. We don't even see her hanging out with girlfriends or anything. No one's has that kind of relationship with her. So for her to suddenly feel like, oh yeah, like I got married, no one was there. And I think she's just suddenly questioning how she has been doing things in some ways, like Jimmy, doing things just out of spite or just strategically just always calculating. And she's kind of missing things. And I think, we've seen it multiple times in this episode. I think this is something that's eventually going to be the rupture. I think you're right. I think it could be something as simple as she's just gone. She doesn't want to be this person anymore, basically.
I've often thought in life, when you say, oh, I wish I were more like this, I wish I were more like that. Well, it can be as easy as just deciding you're going to be that type of person and doing
it. Right. Exactly. But part of that, like you said before, is she needs to extricate herself from Jimmy.
It's codependent for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Jimmy does mention that D-Day is coming. D-Day is coming. So it's very close.
And their big Post-it board there.
Yes, exactly. And of course, what's most important is that her interview with this prestigious foundation is on the same day as D-Day.
Yes.
And Jimmy goes, that's okay. I can handle it on my own. Everything's been done. We're just ready to execute. So you just go and, ace your test. I got this handled. Fate, of course, as soon as these words come out of his mouth, you're like, well, that's not going to happen. Okay, then we jump to a lumberjack in the woods, and I literally was like, "Wait a second!
Oh my gosh!" I was really
is this a commercial?
Well, I know it snows in Flagstaff, Arizona. Maybe they're in the mountains. Yeah.
I literally, how sometimes they're like saying, "Stay tuned. We have a 2-minute excerpt from this upcoming movie or something."
Yeah.
And I'm like, is this like a new Walking Dead spinoff and we're just getting a free scene from it? I'm like, what is happening here? I had no idea.
Yeah, it's so disorienting, right? Yes, when they do that, you're like, why am I watching another show all of a sudden? What is happening here? Yeah.
I had no idea what was happening. The lumberjack turns out to be the cave builder that worked with Werner.
Part of the crew. Yeah.
Part of the crew, right? And he turns out to be the person who sent the slide rule to Werner after he died. I mean, just assuming what we supposed in the last episode, he just called up that person and got the details of who sent it. And here he is showing up at this guy's house. The guy, of course, is very suspicious because I guess he's probably living off the grid. After the whole situation in Arizona, he probably knew that they were in a more dangerous situation. I think they were all sent home before Werner was killed, but then Werner did disappear and did supposedly die in a cave-in, and he must be like, I don't buy any of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think they might have even been instructed to do that. It's possible, right?
It's possible,
that they were
true.
sent home with that direction of, we never want to hear that you exist again.
Exactly. And maybe just some random guy coming by wouldn't have been so troubling, but here's a guy who doesn't even speak German turning up in the middle of nowhere. And he's just like, okay, what's going on here? So smartly, he does not do the whole thing where there's so many horror movies where people are overly polite and end up getting killed. He just makes a break for it. He immediately starts sprinting for it.
Very smart for the time being.
Exactly. Lalo pulls out his gun, but of course he can't kill this guy. The reason he's there is a question of he kills him, doesn't do anything. Plus there might be people in the house, and then that is going to raise alarm bells. So pulling out the gun is a waste of time. The guy gets the upper hand on Lalo, knocks him out, knocks the wind out of him, and Lalo does a great job here acting.
Knocks him out, knocks the wind out of him, and then what? Finish the job, man.
Well, he pulled a gun on him, right? So he really needs to, yeah.
This is back to the horror movie trope, right?
Yes,
you saw the gun, that was enough. Just be done with this.
Right. And then he's saying, no, I just want to know about this. And of course, he has the razor blade hidden behind the card.
This was crazy tricky. Yeah.
Yes, very sneaky. I mean, he must have had that planned, which is crazy, right?
That's what we were talking about here.
He's
wow,
always
what? Really thinking 10 steps ahead there.
Exactly. He's like, if I get cornered and I need to pull this card out, I'll have a razor blade hiding behind. Yeah, so he slashes him in the eyebrow, which distracts him, and of course gets the axe and chops off his foot.
Yikes.
tie that off. Hopefully the guy does not go into shock before you start to ask him your questions.
Hi.
Do you think this guy survives? No, right?
No.
There's no chance.
Yeah, I think he says before you bleed out. So, I mean, I feel like it's just, I think you can prolong the inevitable by maybe tying the leg, but I don't think without medical care, I don't think there's anything you can do here.
I mean, they may lose the appendage, but you can definitely survive. It may mean days, months, actually.
You think so?
Yes. I mean, as long as you don't get some kind of serious infection. I mean, think about it. In the Civil War, that's all they did. They just hacked off the limbs and hoped for the best.
Okay, but he's going to leave him there. Then what?
Oh, no. What I was going to say, though, is I think he can survive. Definitely, let's say he loses some blood now and theoretically you call an ambulance afterwards. I'm saying he's dead because once Lalo questions him, Lalo's not going to let this guy pick up the phone.
One way or the other, whether he gets shot or whatever, but he's not making it. No.
Yeah. I'm not sure why he would talk, to be honest with you, but if we see
avoid torture.
Yes, it's either torture or it's Lalo saying, look, I just need this piece of information and then I'm out of your hair. And the guy just wants to believe it. And then he ends up with a bullet in his head, right? So we'll have to see. The next thing we see, interestingly, we're seeing the little pieces of this plot coming into focus. We see that Francesca has to make another call. She's very uncomfortable with this. Mm-hmm. But Saul needs Francesca to make this call so that she can get the information for the dial-in. So, I mean, you're definitely not supposed to give these things out. But, we know how people are, right? You call up the secretary and you say, oh, my grandma, she doesn't know how to do this. I need to set up her computer. And of course, people just give this information out all the time. It happens all the time. They've given out this meeting information to a total stranger, which, of course, we're going to need at some point for D-Day, for the meeting. And a very funny thing here that I forgot to call out was Francesca was talking about her way she was planning to decorate the office, including having a nice water feature, like kind of like a little waterfall inside the house, inside the office, I should say. And when they walk inside, one of Saul's clients is using it as a urinal.
And also, she has gone overboard on the molding. That was too much molding.
This is another question I had for you. Is this what his office looks like? I remember his office being even gaudier in
I agree.
Breaking Bad, right?
It did get tackier, yeah.
Okay, now another interesting scene here that I want to get your read on. We see that Mike, when he meets with Tyrus has another very uncomfortable interaction with Mike. This is always a problem between the two of them. And it's like, oh, I wonder what's ever going to happen to this. Nothing, because they're both in Breaking Bad. He basically says, why is there no security detail on your apartment? And Mike says, well, I haven't been there in days, so I don't think I need protection. And Tyrus says, well, it's possible that Lalo just shows up there.
Because they know that he is associated with them. So, yeah.
And he goes, well, my security details are thin.
Mm-hmm.
Tyrus calls him out and says, well, you know what? You got those lawyers that are getting followed. You got everybody in town's getting followed. You got people on Alameda Street, very important. And he goes, why don't you move that to detail from Alameda Street? It's a stretch that anyone's going to show up there. And Mike goes, nope, we're not moving the security detail from Alameda Street. And we find out why, because that's where his granddaughter and daughter-in-law are. And similar to Saul's setup, they have a house across the street, and he's like literally talking to them. And that's where he is every night, keeping an eye on them, right? Understandably, even if it's a 1 in 1,000 chance, that is the most precious thing to him, obviously.
And very sweet between him and his granddaughter on looking at the stars and all of that.
I also was not worried about anything bad happening to his granddaughter, like until now. Although I guess they're in Breaking Bad also. Is that true?
I think so. Yep.
I mean, not this actress, right? Because she would have been like 2 on Breaking Bad and now she's 12.
Time moving backwards. Yeah.
She's Benjamin Button. She gets younger as time goes by. Another thing I wanted to read on is the next thing we see is Kim is back with Saul and she's very nervous. So she is getting very stressed out. I kind of read this possibly as she is very conflicted. She just knows that something is going to happen. Something foundational is going to happen in the next day or two. And I think she's afraid of that. Like what is going to happen next?
Yeah, I personally am really good at disassociating, so I don't have that problem.
There you go. And Saul wants to kind of, I think he picks up on her nervousness and says, well, why don't we go out somewhere? And she goes, where? Mm-hmm. And he goes, the Omaha Beach.
Yeah.
So Omaha Beach, of course, where, D-Day took place, or part of it. And
the analogy they've been using all along. Yeah.
Exactly. And then we're like, well, where is this? They're just having a drink outside. And of course, they're right outside of HHM.
Mm-hmm.
where the meeting is going to happen the next day.
Yeah. And it seems to be the mediation, right?
Yes.
And I do want to say, just as far as what generally happens, the last thing you want is your class members at a mediation, like literally the last thing. Because it's too many voices. It's too many people who don't know what they're talking about as far as the legal aspects of the case. You know, it would be highly, highly unusual, although I understand why it would work as a plot device for class members to actually be present at a mediation.
I was thinking it would be two different meetings because I agree that, you know, having the class members there, unless they were muted out, would be way too problematic. It's like a town hall or something. I was assuming that this was like a meeting before the mediation, the official meeting, but I could be wrong about that. You might be right that, you know, for dramatic purposes, they're, you know, just kind of doing it all at once.
It's not unusual to have a class representative at a mediation. I'm not sure, though, that this class has been certified yet, which is when they would appoint the representative. It wouldn't be unusual for there to be one or two people to put a face to the legal claims at a mediation. But this idea of having a dial-in number to me is kind of crazy.
Right. And that they would give it out, right? Like imagine they really do have some, you know, somebody, one person, they, you know, is representing the class as, you know, attending the meeting, that the secretary would just be like, oh, sure, here you go. It makes no sense at all, right? Yeah.
Very strange. But, you know, perhaps just a plot device, or perhaps there's more, like you're speculating, that it just hasn't been spelled out for us.
Right. Okay. D-Day. It's here. Kim's on her way to her meeting with this prestigious nonprofit. We see Jimmy. He's buying the $500 bottle of tequila.
An interesting comment about the stopper, right?
Yes. Be careful. It's sharp.
Yeah. I'm not sure that dangerous nature of the stopper has come up before in all the times we've seen it. Do you recall that?
No, I don't think anybody's mentioned it.
Yeah. I feel like there's something foreboding happening with the stopper there, but maybe not.
It could also be just metaphor because in like, Vince Gilligan mentioned in the most recent one of the interviews before the season started that the tequila stopper is like a metaphor for Kim. And I think that they've only come up with this. They basically turn things retroactively into Easter eggs within the show. The prickly and hard Kim, you know, can be a double-edged sword once again, right? So be careful. It could be sharp.
Excellent point.
And just by coincidence, he happens to be there and he sees that the mediator is there, which, by the way, totally overlooked that. But he has a very funny actor who's trying to get into character to play this guy. You know, they're trying to style his mustache exactly correctly. And they've taken some photographs of him.
I like that board of mustaches. That was kind of cute.
Yes. And I like that she has to come in there and say, well, use this one. But then, you know, it's like someone who does makeup on a regular basis didn't notice. And we've seen the photographs that they've taken. I really like the actor needing his motivation. It's like, these are still frames. You don't speak any words. You just still images.
Yes.
And they haven't really spelled out what this is, but I'll finally get around to it now. And of course, there is his arm broken.
Dun, dun, dun.
Not only, you know, does this person not have broken arm in these photographs, but like there's not even an angle in which like the other arm is obscured in some way. So he's freaking out. He immediately calls up Kim. So I want you to read on this moment here. He's telling her, no, you just keep doing what you're doing. I'm going to take care of it on my own. And then he just stays on the line. He wants her to come back, right? What do you think?
Gosh, I hadn't even considered that. I was so busy thinking about the substance of what was happening.
Yeah.
I was not paying attention to that. I was more just thinking like, maybe you could get a sling.
Right.
That's honestly what I was thinking, is that, well, you know, if you tell them the color of the sling, it should be easy to find one, is actually what I was thinking at the time. Maybe couldn't get one at every pharmacy, but I'm sure you could find a pharmacy medical supply shop that would have such a thing.
Other part of that too is, you know, the pictures are like in black and white. So you can imagine, I mean, honestly, let's say we were going to take those same pictures again, you put them in the sling, you recreate the same images you have, even if you can get everybody together in the 11th hour, you can literally have the arm on the opposite side. You don't even have to put a cast on the arm, right? Because it could just be obscured by like the sling, like you said. It's pretty easy to fake a cast too, by the way. You could just kind of wrap it up in toilet paper or paper mache or something. So
and then I was wondering, how long would it take to contact people? You know, are they readily available? So my mind was going in all those places.
Yeah. So the clock is ticking. And he's honestly probably does need to call it off. But like I said, he just hangs on the phone and he's like, Kim, are you still there? He doesn't hang up on the phone and say, it's off. She says, no, we're doing it now. And she literally pulls a U-turn, right?
Yes.
Which is very disappointing for me, by the way. I really did.
So self-destructive. Yeah. So self-destructive.
All right. So we're at the end of the episode here. I'll give you my impression first. I was pretty unhappy with this episode. I felt like you had kind of planted the seed in my mind. Thank you very much. Last week, where you were saying, like we're getting close to the end. We're spending a lot of time on this plot, right?
Too much time on this for the penultimate episode.
Yes. And it had not been bothering me, but now I'm thinking to myself, in this episode, we're spending so much time on it. They're still playing peekaboo. They're still not telling us what this scam is, although I think I pretty much know what it is at this point. But we still don't have those details. And it definitely will be a fork in the road that Jimmy and Kim, she could be losing this job potentially if this blows back on her. So there's going to have big consequences to this. But like you said, I feel like we've now spent 3 episodes almost doing too much of what this show does so well. I kind of complimented the show at the beginning of this season, mentioning that it's kind of a
slow burn.
It's not only a slow burn, that they have this trick that they do in their individual episodes where they kind of show you something at the beginning and then they don't reveal what it is until the end.
Sure.
And then usually when you find out what you're seeing, it actually opens up another mystery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is like the hook for the next episode or the season itself. And I feel like this scam has been that for this entire half season, but to what end? Like, to your point, it's like, okay, I really feel like they're biding their time.
What's the payoff?
Yeah. In short, it feels like they are padding this out, because you could have had just Lalo's investigation. You could have had just an honest reckoning between Kim and Saul, having to make the decision. Are you going to be Saul? Is she going to be Saul's wife? Or is she going to go off on her own? And you could have just done this like as a straight drama. Instead, they're trying to insert this heist in there to keep us engaged. Is the payoff going to be the same in the end? Maybe there's something very cool coming next week that I do not see coming. And it's not the first time the show's done this. But I really, at this moment, feel like they are biding their time.
Well, I too was surprised that we spent this amount of time here in the penultimate episode, which to me is traditionally, historically, very, very important.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I guess it's not the penultimate of the entire series, but of this half, right?
Correct.
Usually, I find these episodes more enjoyable than the finale episode.
Right.
I feel like usually there's more important stuff going on in the next to last episode than there is in the actual finale, which seeks to have, wrap up things in some way. Just structure wise, I was surprised. But yeah, maybe it will all pay off. And I think there was enough other stuff going on that, ironically, even though I've been complaining about it this entire half of the season, it didn't bother me as much yesterday, because I felt like there was a lot going on with each of the characters that wasn't in that mode of like the zany thing they're doing today.
Right.
So I actually didn't mind it as much as I have been minding it, but I'm dying to know, what is your theory of what's going on here?
Before that, I just wanted to mention, in having our conversation right now, I appreciate this episode a lot more than I did at the time. I was like, there was a lot of stuff that happened in this episode.
now that we spent an hour talking about it, it turns out.
Exactly. Go figure. All right. So I don't know exactly what's happening. This is why I go all the way back to the beginning of this episode when I was asking you, does he know he's being followed somehow?
Mm-hmm.
Because he intentionally has this very, very staid routine, minus getting $20,000 in cash. What does he need $20,000 in cash for? Well, Howard's concerned, well, what's need that money for? Could it be to pay off the mediator? And now we have somebody who looks exactly like the mediator in a picture, shaking hands with who knows who. And is he getting paid off by somebody in those photographs, which, we don't see?
Mm-hmm.
So are we now going to put that into Howard's hands? Right.
That would be a nice full circle parallel of the photographs, which look so much alike at the beginning of the episode and the end of the episode, right?
Right. And then you have Howard, juiced up on whatever this crap is that they put into his coffee or something. And so all of a sudden he's going to be like amped up, like he just had 2 Red Bulls on an empty stomach with his pupils dilated. And when he goes and get a tox screen, it's going to come back clean for whatever reason. But, that's important as well to this whole thing. Is Cliff going to see him, potentially being like ridiculously over the top? Cliff, whose son was an addict, suddenly being like, you are high right now. I've seen your pupils dilated. You are, screaming, and you're paranoid, and you are, have way too much energy. So he just thinks that he's like coked up on something. On coke. On coke.
Literally on coke. Right. In the vein of, am I smart enough to watch this show? As you're spelling out this idea of them going to the veterinarian and using that stuff on Howard, it is so clear and so obvious. And yet it did not occur to me when we were watching the show for whatever reason, because I just am so in the moment. And I was kind of, and again, my own short attention span and distraction, thinking how ironic that he would fake a heart attack and then he really has a heart attack. So,
now, why they need to dial into the meeting, I don't know how that ties into this whole thing. How they're going to get those photographs in front of Howard in time to. That's why I was curious if he knows about this PI. If they do, I think that's a little bit of a cheat. If we see now in flashback that Saul knew this PI, he knew that he'd been hired, and he's going to get the photographs to the PI so that the PI can put them in front of Howard so that Howard could be like, aha, this is what Jimmy's plan was the whole entire time. If that's the case, I think that's a little bit of a cheat, that they're going to be like, they didn't tell us the biggest thing they needed to tell us, which is that Jimmy's in cahoots with this PI. Also a huge coincidence that somehow he knows that Howard's going to hire a PI. That seems like way too much, right? But so that all seems like too much in that regard. So I don't have all the moving pieces, but based on what they showed us, the photographs, the fact that the cast is a problem, the $20,000, and who is this medication really for? I think it's to make Howard look high in front of Cliff, so Cliff doesn't trust them, basically.
Right. Interesting.
And I'm sure it will all come together beautifully next week. But to that point, even if it does, even if I'm like laughing, going like, wow, what a perfectly executed plan, I don't know how satisfying it is for like a mid-season finale this late in the game. Maybe if it was season 3, I should say, this would be fine. But this is the end of the show, right? So kind of delved a little bit into Kim's psychology and some of those elements. I feel like there was more meat on the bone here than I probably gave the show credit for. I was so distracted in many ways by trying to figure out what the plot might be that I don't know if that is what we should be focusing on at this point in the show.
Yes, I agree. I do give the people that make this show a lot of credit. So I'm kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt that all of these decisions are going to make sense and pay off.
Right. And I think also to your point of, the pacing of these shows, I think that when you look at Breaking Bad as an analogy, this episode, the penultimate episode of Breaking Bad, is basically Walt walking around, meeting up with his wife, talking to his son, getting people who might be witnesses, scaring them off of his tail. So it's kind of him just like cleaning
that's a good
house.
Comparison.
It's just pure cleaning house. And then, of course, you have this like very satisfying payoff.
Such a great payoff.
Right. So maybe. But, even if this show never gets better than this, it is still one of the absolute best shows on TV. Maybe my expectations are way, way too high. And also, but the last, to your point, I think these people are incredibly skilled at orchestrating these things. So they're probably smarter than I am. I constantly complain, like when we were discussing Ozark, constantly complain. Oh, we have to talk about Ozark, by the way. I'm like, I could have come up with something better in watching this show. And you probably spent a year plotting this out. You should do a better job than me, right? As a viewer. And I don't feel that way with, for example, shows like Better Call Saul or Breaking Bad, where I'm like, well, I didn't see that coming and it was genius. So, and that's why I appreciate it more.
And let's not forget, this is just the mid-season finale.
Right. So we have a whole 6 episodes to go. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's pivot over to Ozark. You saw the back half of the season, which I had already seen.
I watched 5 hours straight of Ozark on Sunday.
Because it was so good. It was that compelling, right?
You know what? It was, I did enjoy it. I think I like Ozark more than you do. Yeah. And also it was one of those things of, the kid is out of the house. We got to power through these right now because this is not something you can watch when he's around. Right.
I did binge it myself too. I mean, I hate watched really have hate watched so much of this most recent season, but hey, whatever works. I got through it. Right. So
I survived.
Right. I'm trying to watch with my sister The Handmaid's Tale.
Mm-hmm.
And I do not dislike the show at all. And yet I don't think I'm going to make it all the way through season 1. So there's something to be said that even if you're engaged in a hateful way, you still finish the show, right? I mean, you could just jump straight to the finale if that's the most interesting thing you want to talk about. But what did you think about like where the show lands as far as each one of these characters, the main characters goes? I really wanted to see Ruth survive. It's the only character I had sympathy for.
As well. Yeah, I agree. And, I've talked before about how I really disliked her at first, and then I grew fond of her over the course of the series. And so I would have liked to have seen her survive, although the foreshadowing was there. I mean, she's talking to all those dead people,
Yes. So. Yes. I knew she was going to die right away when she was like communing with the dead the whole entire time.
Right. And it seemed very heavy handed. Yes. She's in the white dress, Camilla's in the black dress. The Ruth we know would not have gotten out of her car and gone up to the other car without a weapon even. She's too smart for that, right? Even if she thinks everything is resolved and life is good, she still is carrying all of that baggage with her. I don't think she'd let it go and be so naive in that moment.
I think she knows she's going to die at that moment, actually. And maybe... Yeah, I think she does know that she's going to die at that moment.
I will say she looked lovely. The dress was beautiful. Yes. So it was a very dramatic shot of her laying there in the white dress. Unfortunate that if someone had to die in that finale, it was Ruth.
Yes, there's so many better options.
Totally crazy. Anybody. Yes, exactly. Totally crazy to me that this family would get in that kind of car accident and then go on with their day.
Oh, my God.
To the fact that I was kind of like, is this a dream sequence?
Yes.
This is in someone's head? Because clearly you need to be checked for a head injury.
Yes.
After you've barely survived, it seemed like. I mean, they're like pulling Laura Linney out of that car. I mean, that's the type of thing where as they're pulling her, I was thinking, I think the medical advice would be don't move until somebody can get here.
And don't sleep that night. That's for sure.
Yeah. Like internal bleeding. I mean, none of that made sense to me. So it was a very strange decision to have that be, the opening scene of the final season, and then wrap around to that and have that be the consequence that they went off the road, but everybody's fine. And
they called the taxi. They called the taxi and went home. That was the outcome of that whole thing. It's bananas.
And then went about their day as if nothing happened. I mean, and nobody seemed particularly, you can get whiplash from having a fender bender. None of this made sense to me. I don't think it was medically sound. So,
absolutely not.
So that was very strange to me. I do think there was some interesting stuff there about the family and what it has become. And I liked the interaction between, and I can't remember if this was in the final episode or leading up to it, between Jason Bateman and the blue cat lady. I can't remember her name. Maybe it's Rachel.
Yes, I think so.
About her. I see, this is where I am with this show. I can't remember anyone's name. I can't remember, but her cousin, brother, whoever it is, the developmentally disabled boy, man. I'm not sure how old he's supposed to be, that had been working at the Blue Cat, that Jason Bateman had assured her he would always have a job, and here, he's completely lost track of where this kid is and what he's doing. And I thought that was an interesting point she was making of, he likes to see himself as the good guy.
Right.
But here was this one thing he was supposed to do in exchange for, the agreement that they had made, and he couldn't do it. And he didn't look after that kid. I mean, and she wasn't asking all that much, right? So I thought it was an interesting commentary on that character, because as you know, I find Jason Bateman very likable, but he's lost the thread. He is partly right in that he's telling this story of Laura Linney has just run amok and there's nothing anyone can do. They're all along for the ride, to use a further car analogy. It's like she's,
right.
They're all stuck in the car with her as she drives it off the cliff, he says, right?
Right.
And it's partly true, but partly you do have your own free will. Yeah, I mean, I thought there was a lot of interesting stuff going on. I was not unhappy with the finale and the black screen and the gunshot and all of it. was fine for me. I didn't find it satisfying, but I also didn't find it upsetting. I thought that PI was really annoying. So that probably is part of the reason. So, and that stupid goat cookie jar,
Yes.
in the end, I was ready to see it go.
Yes. So a few questions I have for you. What's your interpretation of the ending? Who does he shoot?
I think it's a given that he shoots the PI. It has not occurred to me he could shoot anyone else but the PI. What do you think?
I was angry at the ending because cutting to the black was, I think, intentionally, and you see his eyes moving and stuff that, they're supposed to tease the fact that he maybe shot his parents because, the parents are never going to stop. This is never going to end, right, for him. They're the ones who are perpetrating all this stuff. I think that's the intention in cutting to black. But in having this conversation, and having this conversation with multiple people since then, I was starting to get more and more convinced. Like Nick, I had the same conversation with Nick, the other co-host on the Moon Knight shows, and he basically said, "Oh yeah, the guy's dead." End of story. And then in having that conversation, I'm like, I agree. I think that's the case. And even more so by coincidence, I read a headline, which was an interview with the actor who plays the boy, the son. And he said the way they shot this originally is that the PI approaches him and says, you don't want to do that. And then, basically hands up and stands between himself and the parents. And then he tells him to get away from his parents, right? And we're assuming he says get away from his parents so that his parents aren't in the line of fire. And when he gets out of the way, he keeps the gun on his parents. And then he pivots to him. And then we hear the gunshot, which of course is explicitly saying that he killed him, right? So that's the way it was shot. And then, I did not know that until this week when he gave that interview. Explicitly, the way written, the way shot originally, he definitely kills him. Then they decided to go with the cut the black to make it more ambiguous, to go with a little, like explicitly calling out the Sopranos ending in their own description of it, which annoyed me, by the way, because I thought that the show was kind of reaching for something that it really hadn't earned. Just to speak to the fact that they're kind of maybe weren't being very ambiguous in the original interpretation of this, and then they made it more ambiguous retroactively, which kind of feels like the show in general to me. But my biggest pet peeve with the show is not in what it's trying to say thematically, and they lay it right on the line there, right, where the PI at the end goes, people like you can't just keep doing all these things and getting away with it. And Laura Linney's answer is, since when? This is the history of America, basically, right? So
I thought that was a great moment. Yes.
You like that? I actually thought it was a little too heavy-handed, but
I thought it was great because, it really was. I think it would have annoyed me if there was any other response but that, actually.
And I think that's what the show obviously has been for a very long time, is this message of, this kind of entitled white privilege that these middle class liberals who basically talk a good talk, but when it comes down to their family and their own creature comforts, they throw everybody under the bus to get what they want. So it is a stinging indictment of that type of mindset. My biggest complaint of the show is that I'm not sure how good of a job they did of developing that point of view throughout, but it's not even that. It's just the plotting. Like, I get so frustrated with the fact where people should be dead 10 times over and they're not. Where, like I mentioned to you earlier, people walk into a room, should not survive, and they walk out and they're like, well, how did you survive? They're like, I did it. And they're like, okay, well, that doesn't explain anything.
1,000% agree.
And a perfect example of this, my very, really hateful reaction I had in this season, the most hateful thing out of so many hateful things I had for this show, was the whole setup that, the car crash at the beginning, which is just saying like, ho, ho, everybody stay tuned. What's going to happen? They're a week away from being free and clear. And then they have this car accident. And the payoff to that is absolutely nothing. It's like literally like we're going to take a cab home because our car got wrecked.
Agree. That was a very cheap thing to do.
So cheap. And
yes.
That is crystallizing what I feel is the problem with the show. I feel like the writing is so sloppy. They really don't care. And that really bothers me. Like, they should care, especially by season 4. You should really care about the people who are still watching your show. Right.
Yes, I agree. That was a very cheap thing to do. So I'm absolutely on board with that. I agree that while that commentary I find very interesting, was it the intention of the show? That's not entirely clear. It seems like something that was retroactively put there in a way. I will say also, though, I did think it was very interesting what they did with Laura Linney's father,
Yeah, that was pretty
in
interesting.
this final episode, because that was something that I didn't expect to be all that interested in. And I did end up finding it very interesting. And it did humanize her character, I think, in a way that was needed if they were going to make her go over the top the way they did.
Right.
At least it provided some balance and explanation of why she is the way she is.
Yeah.
Because honestly, I was shocked that I could feel sorry for her at this point. But I did, because he was so awful. And I like the buildup of how they didn't really show you how awful he was until really the end.
Right, right.
You know, so you kind of are left wondering, like, well, what really did happen here? And you hear her make these random comments about how he hit her or whatever.
The much more damning thing, I think, at the end wasn't even that. It was when Ruth gets him to confess the fact that he doesn't even care about the kids. He really just wants to get one over on his daughter, which, you know, obviously is the real indictment of his character.
Exactly. I like the reveal of that and the way it built to that. So there was some good stuff there, I felt.
Yeah, and I would say that once again, my problem with the show is so much in the plotting and the writing of these characters. I think that these actors deserve a lot of credit for pulling this off, because I think about that scene where Laura Linney like prostrates herself in front of her dad, and it's so painful to watch. Yeah, so exactly. Painful. And I hate her, and I still find it excruciating to watch that scene. And that's all Laura Linney, because there is nothing in her character that these writers have given her to hang on to make her sympathetic, other than just like, oh, and she was abused as a kid, right? And all that pathos we put on it is because of her performance, because she's just done such an incredible job. So I want to be clear that I don't criticize any of these actors. I think they've all done great work. I mean, Ruth, what's her name? Julia Garner, great performance.
And also, I will say, we were talking in my house about how it's kind of cool to see these two actors from The Americans who, from our recollection, were never in a scene together in The Americans. But here, you know, having so many scenes together, it was kind of neat.
Right. So yeah, that's where I was. I was not saying I was a little disappointed with the show, because honestly, I was kind of watching it for us to have these conversations. I knew where I was with this show quite some time ago. I never liked it
to begin with.
Exactly. You know what? I'm not going to say that. I still remember how great those first couple episodes were. Directed by Jason Bateman, by the way. Incredibly tense, really excellent directing work he did there. And I still think in season 1, think about that moment where he's about to kill himself to save his family. What an incredibly painful moment that is. Now, where is that character now in the show? Unrecognizable, right? But
it felt like they were still trying to ride the idea of you would do anything to save your family.
Right.
And it became less and less believable as there were more off-ramps from from their path that they chose not to take, and was becoming more of a, you know, Walter White Breaking Bad situation of like, well, you're doing this because you like what it gets you. You like this power. You're having fun doing this.
Exactly.
But it never explicitly addressed that shift the way it was explicitly addressed in Breaking Bad.
Yeah, I mean, going back to season 1, you know, where the show worked, even though it had the same plotting issues it had then, it still works in the fact, like you said, that you have somebody who thinks they know better than everybody else. I'm smart and I'm going to get away with this. And then all of a sudden they see someone's like eyes gouged out in front of their face, literally. And they're like, oh my God, I'm going to die. And then of course they want to save their family, anything to save their family. And then they have a plan for that as well. And then, of course, now you have this culture clash of these city folks and now these rural folks, and they're not going to play by the same rules. So all of that is really interesting stuff. And then I really feel like after that first season, like, where do they go with that? You know, they really just spun their wheels for a very long time. And like you said, every time they just keep throwing plot at us, instead of slowing down, like kind of a Better Call Saul strategy, they started at like a breakneck pace and they kept accelerating. And like you said, it's just like, how much runway is there when you're like avoiding death every single episode? Like, how many times can you do this when it's has any plausibility anymore, right?
Yeah, and it just became less and less believable that this was their only option.
Right.
And I think that was never really addressed. I think up to the end, we were supposed to be believing, aside from Laura Linney's character, who clearly had gone off the rails, I think we were still supposed to believe that on some level they were making these choices because they were trying to do the best for their family.
Right.
And that just became really unbelievable to me by the end.
Right.
I did like thinking about this finale as we're talking. I also did like, though, that moment where, not like, but that sounds like I was happy about this. I was not happy about it, but the moment where they realized that Ruth is doomed.
Yes.
I thought was really well done.
Great acting once again.
Yeah.
That's probably the best thing they could do on the show is like no dialogue at all. Just let the actors do the work. Just
nervous glances.
It worked. Hey, it worked. They could definitely do that well. So here's my dream ending. And once again, I think I set up my expectations. Part of the reason I was so disappointed here is because my dream ending of this show that I started putting together in the first half of this final season, this is what I was hoping for. These folks think they're outwitting everybody. They're stabbing everybody in the back. They're treating everybody like crap. And they keep advancing through this weird pyramid they're climbing. And that in the end, they all end up dead. And all these people who hated them, all these people who were in these toxic interactions with them have all exited this and they're better off. So, for example, Ruth is like an opium empire. It's an opium empire. And what was her name? The girl who used to own the blue cat.
I think it's Rachel, but I'm not 100%.
Rachel now, she's she's like now managing the casino and, has a career and she's back on track again. The PI is back at the police department. What's her name? The cartel sister is now running the cartel. And I was just like, that would be great that these people are like been screwing everybody over to advance themselves. And in the end, they end up dead and everybody else benefited for that would be a truly ironic ending. Right. And especially because I disliked the family so much, I was ready to get them all killed off. So this was really kind of the opposite of the ending I wanted. So, but that's what we get.
Damn it. They all survived.
Yeah, exactly. That was literally my answer. I'm like, man, couldn't at least one of them have died? Man. Anyway. So thank you for the conversation. I like this episode of Saul even more, and I dislike Ozark just as much.
Fair enough.
But we will see what happens in next week's finale. I can't wait to see that.
Yes. And
everybody stay tuned later this week. My review for the new Alex Garland movie, Men, which is coming out in wide release. It's not a mainstream movie, so not sure how many people are actually going to go see this, but I'm very curious to see it. And also in that same episode, we'll be talking about Barry and Shining Girls as well, the Elizabeth Moss series on Apple Plus. So stay tuned for all of that, and I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.